weird. So I'm going to start by telling you some stories. In the 1940s, there was a terrible crisis in the city of Chicago where children were dying around the meatpacking plant, where all the families all lived close to the meatpacking plant. It was called an industrial area. It didn't have a name for a suburb or a township or anything. Hadn't got around to that. And the children were dying because the effluent from the meatpacking plants just went out onto the street. And the children would play in the puddles and they would die. And the bishop of Chicago got together with the union chief, the head of the union for the meatpackers. And the two of them decided that although this wasn't a union issue, it wasn't about wages or working conditions, and it wasn't a church issue, it wasn't about faith or prayer or funerals or weddings, it was really important that they did something. And so they got their people together, both from the churches and the workers, and they went to talk to the city of Chicago and said, fix this. And they did. And out of that, the Industrial Areas Foundation was born, which is the U.S. mothership, if you like, of the work that we're doing. And they have 63 chapters in the U.S., and they have branched out to form IAF-affiliated groups in Australia, England. In England, it's called Citizens UK. And they are the reason why London has a progressive mayor. They have Citizens UK chapters in Bristol, Cardiff, two areas in London, and somewhere else, just 4 or 5 of them. It's a massive movement. In many places in the U.S. where you can pocket progressive, you can identify progressive municipalities, you will find an IAF group there. In Australia, they're transforming Sydney. And in Vancouver, the Metro Vancouver Alliance is in the process of helping to make Vancouver a much more livable city, although the work is slow and hard. That's what we're trying to do in Victoria. So that's kind of a bit of a background. Let me tell you some other stories. Find the right page. So in Vancouver, the Metro Vancouver Alliance has 55 member organizations. Together they represent about 350,000 people, I think it is. It might be more than that. All the major unions, many large churches, many not-for-profits, lots of groups that are in groups like that. They don't have very many environmental groups. Environmental groups have been a hard sell. And would you let me move into the screen of that? Oh no, you've got this camera on me. Mm-hmm. I'm going to talk about why that is in a little while. But when they got their people together in NDA, they they go through a whole process, which I'll explain in a minute, to identify the common issues. And one that came up was the need to pay a living wage. And so they got together right before the municipal election the last time, and they had the candidates up in front of a meeting with a lot of people there, representing a lot more people. And they did a roll call, just like we did. Only when they do a roll call there, the 55 organizations with the largest unions in the province. They're large parishes, large organizations of teachers and scientists, so not the usual suspects. And they said to each of the 4 mayoral candidates, if you are elected mayor, will you commit to making the city of Vancouver a living wage employer? And all of them said yes, even the right-wing ones. And so it's hard to say no when you've got this massive assembly in front of you. And so when Gregor Robertson was elected and put in place his decision, which wasn't hard for him, he wants to do this, he had no opposition because all his other fellow candidates said they would do it too. And so, although they may have been lying, we don't know, the important thing is that they couldn't oppose it. So the Living Wage Initiative in Vancouver has gone through unopposed. It's uncontroversial. As well as that, the City of Vancouver has been able to use that to require all contractors with the city to pay a living wage. And so the City of Vancouver is transforming. Now, was the Metro Vancouver Alliance responsible for that? Well, you could argue that they wanted to be a living wage employer anyway. But with that kind of citizen support, it makes it very hard not to do it and much easier to do it. So that's another story. In Vancouver, the transit system works well in the inside city, but very poorly on the outside. And so one of the things that they're working on now is a plan to improve the transit system. Not by having BC Transit tell people what transit they need, but by bringing together groups of people in organization meetings like this, saying, where do you need your transit improved? Now, that's not being called climate action, but it is action on climate at the municipal level. And so one of the things that's been hard for me as a leader of environmental organizations is to understand that when you talk about climate, you get nowhere. When you talk about transit, you get places. When you talk about climate, you get no traction. But when you talk about building affordable housing that is going to be affordable to live in because it has low energy costs, you get places. Mm-hmm. I worked so hard to get climate onto the policy agenda. I remember the first day there was a Globe and Mail headline with the word climate in it. Yay, we won. Well, actually not, right? So it's a fundamental precept of adult education that you start where people are at. And outside of the usual suspects, people are thinking about getting their kids to soccer and where their rent payment is going to come from. And climate is somebody else's problem if they think about it at all. So we have to be respectful of that. How disrespectful is it for us to impose our agenda on them? Right? So even though we know, of course we know best because we are well educated and we're scared, we know that climate is a huge problem and it's still not respectful. So that's one of the things that I've had to really come to terms with, is how to talk about it in a way that feels respectful to other people. All right, another story. In Victoria, so actually I want to read from a testimonial that so we wanted, we in the climate movement wanted, we know action is at the municipal level. And we wanted to get the city of Victoria to commit to being a 100% renewable city. Not hard, very progressive council. And, geez, I think I might have lost this. I just have to tell you what he said. So a little bit of work in the background with the BC Sustainable Energy Association, helping the city of Victoria to understand what policy to put in place was very helpful. The West Coast Environmental Law Group has already written climate policy. If you're interested in municipal work, just go onto their website. It's all laid out there. By the way, I'm sure you all know this, but governments don't write policy anymore. NGOs, good, bad, or indifferent, write the policy, right? So if you want to have change, don't expect government to write the policy, write it for them. CCPA is all over this. So the policy was written, it happened, it was no ripple. But now we thought, okay, there's only 3 cities in the country that have committed to implementing the Paris targets. Okay, Victoria's one, Vancouver's one, there's one in Ontario somewhere. It's a little tiny rural municipality. We ought to be profiling them, they're heroes.
Hands on that board, I'm sure.
And so, what are we going to do? Well, Victoria is like, it's a green place. People get it, right? So what are we going to do? Well, the municipality of Saanich is big, so let's go for growth. Yeah, the plan is to take them down one at a time. And so BC Sustainable Energy Association and Sierra Club start working on a presentation to Saanich Council, but they're also affiliated with Greater Victoria Acting Together, which is in the process of forming. So we haven't formed yet at GVAT. We're still coming together, but we're getting to know people. And so we know people at the BCGEU. We know people at the Holy Cross Parish in Saanich, which is a very large Catholic church. We know that the Pope has asked Catholics to get involved in social justice and environmental work. So we know it's filtering down. I happen to know somebody who helped to write the latest papal encyclical on that topic, and he was telling me about it, and I thought, okay, it's coming. There's a way we can jump on it. And so when BCSDA and Sierra Club were thinking about this approach to council, I and other people who are working with GVAT said, well, if we just go as environmental groups, why should they listen to us? And they said, you know what, we're right. And we pushed them, and I can say this because the young man who was their organizer doing it says we pushed them, to involve Holy Cross, where he happened to be a parishioner, and to involve the two local high schools, because where we happen to have somebody who was interested, who was working with Sierra Club, who went to that high school, and businesses, local businesses that were going to try to make money out of building solar and wind in our region. And instead of us taking the podium and being the upfront people, we did a quick presentation, and then people, civil society started appearing in front of them. They had unions, they had Holy Cross Catholics, they had the synagogue, they had Unitarians, they had high school students, they had businesses. What's Saanich Council going to say? No. And we worked out very carefully what it was that we were going to ask them to do so that it was a doable. It wasn't, okay, adopt the Paris targets right now. No, they weren't going to do that. But we worked out very carefully what our ask was so that we knew what was doable. And now Saanich has committed to adopting the Paris targets and becoming the fourth municipality to be 100% climate. Once we've got Saanich, it becomes much easier to take down the small municipalities, violent language, to bring in. So that's another story. Let me tell you another one. I'm very, very proud of the work that the Sierra Club has done in protecting the Great Bear Rainforest. Anybody heard of that here? Mm-hmm. So it's big. It's the size of Belgium. It's huge. But we didn't do it as a club. We did it with coalitions throughout the GBR. And we wrote the policy for the government. And we insisted that they implement the policy. And when they weren't implementing the policy, we were working with a neoliberal government this entire time, 16 years. And when they weren't going to implement, we brought the businesses in because we knew that that's where the elbow room was, right? And now the GBR is not just exist, but it's actually being implemented with local Indigenous people being the watchkeepers on the ground, all right? Now, that's not a story about the usual suspects. That's a story about civil society getting together and saying, this we need to make happen. Let me tell you another story with an unhappy ending. Anybody here heard of Site C? Mm-hmm. We lost Site C. We lost it because we treated it as
Interesting, I think there's anyone who doesn't know, maybe just say what it is.
Okay, so Site C is a huge mega dam that is going to be built on some of the most valuable farmland left in British Columbia. It could have fed 1 million people. It's more resilient to climate change than lots of other parts of our farmland in this country. And it happens to be sacred land for a number of Indigenous people. And the government, a new Democratic government, had a report from the Utilities Commission that would have allowed them, gave them the wiggle room to say, you don't have to implement it, it's going to go massively over budget, all kinds of things. And they chose to decide to build a dam. That isn't because the new Democratic government are bad people. I'm personal friends with the Minister of Environment. I call 4 cabinet ministers by their first names. They know me, I know them, they're good people. They didn't have the people's movement behind them. They were looking at the forces of capital in this world. And the public opinion polls in British Columbia show that the public supports the building of Site C dam. We lost that because we did not organize across sectors. That's why we lost that. All right. And another one, proportional representation. Any PR nerds in the room? So I happen to think this is the most important issue, and people don't connect the dots. And that's our problem. That's our fault. Many of you are my age. We carry responsibility for that because we haven't taught people to connect the dots. We've worked in silos. So when we work only on climate, we work in silos. When we say, okay, well, my issue is going to be affordable housing, we work in silos. We can't do that anymore. We're losing. Okay, so I'd like to show the presentation, but before we do, in terms of goal for the meeting, the time that we have together, I've heard, how do we have impact on municipal government? I've heard, what's the evidence that it works? I've heard, how do we get the churches in? Who's got a goal out there that doesn't seem like it's going to be met based on what I've said so far and what you've heard? Yes?
How do you avoid a coalition getting to the local community?
Okay, good question. Okay. Yeah. How do you avoid boiling down to the lowest common denominator? Okay.
How do you move forward so it doesn't drain the energy of groups to be part of it?
Right. Okay. Good question. Yep. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Right. Okay. How do you get youth involved? Okay. So if you don't hear those questions being answered, please don't be shy. Okay, we'll try to answer them. All right. So are we ready to roll with this?
I have had the projector, which was all happy before the meeting, tell me that its signal cable is not reaching it. So I've tried to turn it off and on a couple of times, but that hasn't helped.
Get that young lad in there.
Okay, do you have ideas?
I mean,
Maybe the whole
that
bit.
idea.
So my computer has the presentation on it. That part is working.
You want to continue my talk because we're working with this?
Sure. So let me tell you why I became involved in this initiative. I was working in the labor movement in 1986. Anybody heard of the Solidarity Coalition? Any really old people here?
Just Mitchell, you know?
So in 1980, when I was just graduating from law school in 1979, we had a new Democratic government that was transforming institutions. In Columbia, they brought in the Labor Relations Board, the WorkSafe BC, Workers' Compensation Board, Environmental Protection. They were building institutions, which is what we need to do in order to protect people. And along came the neoliberal administrations and started dismantling all those institutions. As a matter of top priority, they understand how important it is to have institutions that are built to protect people dismantled very quickly. And so that was going on, and the labor movement was alive to that and formed a coalition with faith groups and not-for-profits. And there weren't any climate groups to speak of back then, but lots of oppressed sectors. And it was called the Solidarity Coalition because of the Polish Solidarity movement, right? So we're kind of riffing off that. And we had 250,000 people on the street. So I was working for the Bus Drivers Union in Vancouver, and we shut down the buses, and we did it in a way we got 18 supportive editorials out of the Vancouver Sun. We had public support, okay? And so the deal was done there were a lot of public sector contracts that were up for negotiation. Public sector unions did what they had to do, which was to protect their members. They got something resembling a collective agreement they could live with, and they stopped organizing with the Solidarity Coalition, and it fell apart. And people are still bitter about that. 1985, that was happening. I think that's my phone that was. And I learned from that if you do transactional coalition building, you're never going to get to the places we need to get. I was more linked than many people because that's kind of naturally what I do. And so I was responsible for bringing in some of the faith groups and some of the not-for-profits, even though I was a staffer in the labor movement. But I didn't have the depth of relationship with the anti-poverty groups or some of the non-traditional faith communities. We didn't have that depth. And so it fell apart. People were suspicious of each other, and they're still suspicious of each other. And so I learned that relationships is everything. I've been working on a panic agenda around climate since I saw Al Gore's movie. I'm late to the party. I'm late. Some of you have been organizing around climate a lot longer than that. But we hit the panic button in my household. And it isn't working. We're losing. And so we need to step back. We need to say, okay, who are you when you're not a climate organizer? What do you really care about? What is it that gets you up in the morning? It isn't some vague notion of the climate going to hell. It's probably got something to do with your family, or possibly your neighbor, or something that you, in Betty Ann's case, it'll have something to do with making the birthing experience safer for women and babies, right? So what is it that gets you up in the morning? That's the place that we need to connect with people. And they're not going to tell you just because you ask them. You have to build a relationship with them, right? So that takes time. And I'm impatient. This has been the hardest thing for me about this work, because I can see what needs to be done. And, people are just slow, and it's like everybody should know this, right? And it doesn't work. It's arrogant, and it doesn't work. And so what do we do? So our organizing methodology in Victoria has been like this. We start with house parties, not unlike this. We'd have a maximum of 6 or 7 people together. We would try for cross sectors, so some people from church, some people students, some people from union, and they'd walk in and they'd never have met each other before. Victoria, the population is 350,000 people. The number of activists is, I think, about the same as in Ottawa, and yet people wouldn't have met each other, right? And so, having a conversation where you get to see that the union boss actually doesn't have horns and is worried about his kids' mental health, and the church person, they're not actually going to try to convert me on the spot or abuse my kids right now, right? So just that experience of getting to know people is so bonding. And then you meet each other in a movie lineup or a restaurant or another meeting, and you have a completely different experience of that engagement. And so we held dozens and dozens and dozens of house meetings just using our network, right? And when we had house meetings, we'd say, thank you for coming. Who else would you like to bring the next time? Or, who do you think in your union would be interested in learning more about this? We're not asking people to do anything. We're just bringing them together. Then we held a big teach-in with, at the same time, we're reaching out to our network of leadership, people in organizations who are in leadership positions, and we're saying, look what they're doing in Vancouver. We want to do that here. Look what they've been doing in Seattle. We want to do that here. It works better to talk about Vancouver than Seattle. We've learned that. You have 2 models now, Vancouver and Victoria. There are 2 other IAF groups. One's in Calgary, one's in Edmonton. They're not as successful as we are. I wouldn't, they're interesting, and they've got some interesting things happening, but there aren't the stories coming out of those towns yet that we have them here in Vancouver and Victoria, and stories are what drives them. And so we had a meeting. The first meeting was a bit like this. 70 people showed up. It was just advertised through churches. So it just happened. A lot of it depends on where it gets started. I wasn't involved then, but a friend of mine just put out the word to her very good network. She supports the local food bank. She's the organizer, and she's very active in her church, which happens to be mine. And Kairos put the word out, and a whole bunch of people came. And about a year later, they had somebody come from MBA, kind of like I'm talking to you. About 6 or 7 months later, I said to Peggy, well, the federal election is over. I worked really hard on that. I'm sort of looking for somebody to do. She said, how I got an opportunity. So she and I work basically full time for the next year, putting this together. And so it's a lot of work. And we went to a 5-day training, which the Industrial Areas Foundation offers periodically through Vancouver and now through Victoria and sometimes in Edmonton or Calgary. And so we kind of had a drink of the Kool-Aid and learned about their model. And there's lots about their model that doesn't work in Canada. But they've been very open to working with us to change it, right? So, somewhat unexpectedly, and I need to say that my experience of U.S.-based unions, when I was a young woman working in the labor movement, was not very good. They kind of see it, we're doing it your way, our way, it's the right way. But the people inside the IAF are much better about that. And so we've been working to change the way that so for example, we spend a lot more time on Indigenous issues than they have in the U.S. Another change that we've made is we really center climate groups. Because I said to Peggy, I'm happy to get involved, but you know what? I'm not an anti-poverty organizer. Affordable housing is important. It's not my thing. My thing is climate. And so I'm not going to do this unless we have climate groups. And she said, bring them in. So we've been working to try and break the mold and get environmental groups interested. And you know what? It's hard work. It's hard work because I think as a climate organizer, I'm panicked about the climate. I appreciate that a living wage is really, really important. I really get it about affordable housing. We got a whole bunch of young people living with us because Victoria is no longer an affordable city to live in. Not that I don't get it about it, it's because everything else is overwhelmed by climate. And so for me to put climate on hold while I wait to lend support to an anti-poverty, like that doesn't feel natural to me. I've learned to do that. I've learned the importance of doing that. And I've learned through that it's possible to frame climate issues in those terms. And unless we can do that, we're going to lose. So we might as well learn how to do it. So Victoria is breaking the mold all over the world in terms of centralizing the importance of climate in the work that we do. And hopefully something will happen in Ottawa that will even be better. So what happens is you bring all of these groups together. Once you've got a broad cross-section, we're aiming for 10 unions, 10 not-for-profit, some of which will be environmental groups, and 10 church-based groups. Once they're all in and they're all paying dues, because you got to support an organizer, you can't keep the lights on with somebody operating the photocopy machine in the back room. It takes money. And so once we've got dues paying members of about 30, we'll be able to break even, and then we'll form. And then we will bring everybody together, 1 or 2 people from each group, and we will say, what are your priorities? What are your shared priorities? And so here's an example of the kind of thing that we might do. We might say to a group of people like this group of people, given what you know about the people in Ottawa, what are your priorities for action? And you can only pick 3. So if I was to ask you that question, how do you think you would answer it? Is it okay if we take a break from the feed and answer that?
Sure.
So meet with somebody now who you don't know. Okay, talk to somebody that you don't know. See if you can come up with 3 shared priorities. And don't worry if you can't. But just have the experience of it, okay? And now we're talking about
Hello all, so we'll just hang in there while waiting for the groups there to discuss. In the not too distant future, I hope online platforms are able to allow us to break into groups of our own and have kind of small group discussions on these webinar forums. Unfortunately, that is not the case at the moment. And looking forward to that being a reality in the not too distant future. So thanks so much. If you have any questions for Patricia, you can feel free to send them to us privately in the chat with the chat feature, or use the Q&A feature that is also at the bottom of your screen.
context of the work that we're trying to do, in the context of the methodology, right? So if we're ready to run the slideshow, which I think we might be, then we could do that. And what you do is you press there. Yeah. All right, so here you can see the cluster. We don't call ourselves a coalition because the word coalition has a bad rap in BC, but it's going to be very context specific because of the Solidarity Coalition, right? So we're trying to do something new. Each one of these groups that's a member will vote for a representative on the leadership team. In Vancouver, the chairs of the leadership team, there's co-chairs. One's the head of the Labour Council, which is the Canadian Labour Congress is up here. They have Labour councils in cities around the world, around the country. So that's kind of the locus of local organizing for labor groups. So the head of the Labour Council is the chair of the organizing, the chair of the leadership team in Vancouver, along with the representative of one of the largest faith groups. Okay, so, and then they have positions and it's all very organized and stuff, but so if you get to vote for a representative on that, so we're building institutions, okay? So that's a cluster of people who will work for the common good. Go ahead. Part of a global network. I talked a little bit about the story of GBAT. It's important that you know that it was formed, the leaders were all people of faith who'd been working in with a group of across churches called Faith in Action. And they were doing things like protesting. They would go sleep on the steps of the legislature. They would, you know, participate in the count of homeless people. They would write letters. And there people used to agency. So Peggy's a past headmistress of one of the local elite private schools. You know, people are lawyers and doctors, and they're used to being listened to. And they would write a letter and nothing would happen. And they would have a protest and nothing would happen. And they would, you know, talk to their MLA and nothing would happen. And they would talk to their, you know, local mayor and nothing would happen. Any familiarity?
Patricia, I resemble that remark.
Yeah.
They lived in Ottawa.
Exactly. And nothing would happen. And so people who are used to having agency don't like it when nothing happens. And they start thinking, okay, what should we be doing differently? But it's important to understand that that's not the experience of most people. Most people are not used to having agency. And so if you're used to having agency, you're different. And we need to get used to that idea. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to bring students in. And people in traditional congregations. Like one of the wonderful things about the new Pope, from my perspective, as somebody who's also, you know, not only do I cross sectors, but I cross faiths. I'm a member of both Anglican and Catholic churches. And the new Pope is interested in people having agency. He doesn't use that language, but that's what he's interested in. So they thought, well, we got to do something different. And they went looking and they found the Metro Vancouver Alliance model, and they started it. So, you know, the question about how to draw people of faith in, it's challenging if you don't have a social justice tradition in your parish or in your area. But many, you know, you might not have yet hit the right Anglican church, but there will be an Anglican church in this community that has that tradition.
Oh, no.
And the Unitarian, there you go. Okay, so that's where you start. You start with the low-hanging fruit, right? So that's how they started, and that's why they're doing this, right? So this, you can't read this, but this says respect on that, okay? And so that's a really, really important principle in the work that we do. And that means that, you know, I go to Peggy and say, I really want to organize around proportional representation. And she says, take a back seat. You got to figure out what people want to organize about. And so if I want people to organize about PR, I have to listen to what's bothering them. You know, when you get up in the morning, what is on your mind? What what is the thing that keeps you awake at night? Well, for me, the chances are that it's going to be something to do with my family. It just is. I mean, I sometimes lie awake thinking vague, wild thoughts about climate, but it's not that often. So it means starting from the assumption at the beginning that the people that you're working with at this meeting are not going to be the people that you work with, all of them at the next meeting. But you do want a core group, and that's what we've had a core, sometimes 5, so acting, and then you go to evaluating. And one of the reasons I really like the model is there's a lot of emphasis on evaluation. Before we leave today, I'm going to ask you to evaluate this meeting. Hopefully. Is it 10 to 4? 3:30. Okay. So it's really, really important, because otherwise, how do we learn? Okay, keep going. So together we are not just the usual suspects. So, try saying no to this group of people. Watching of one of these meetings, I was in a training and they tried to do an people go do stuff with their families. And there were a whole bunch, had 3 MLAs, that's and they had reframed the ask so the mayors could say yes, right? So if they'd asked for this, then they wouldn't be able to say yes, but where the chief of police said no or wiggled around it. And I've seen sometimes where people let them off the hook, but there's a skill to this stuff, right? So, so the mayors were being asked if they would set aside the land, and the feds were being asked would they give the money. And everybody knew what was going to be asked, and everybody said yeah. It still hasn't happened. And the reason that it hasn't happened is that the movement wasn't strong enough to follow up on its yes, right? On its ask. So at the end of the pinning, it's often traditional to say back, have the people say back to the audience what the audience can do to make it easier for them to deliver on the yes. And in that case, the mayors are really clear, start showing up at our council meeting. I'm just one voice, so often I don't even have a vote. Start coming to the council meetings, letting other councillors know that this is really important. Start being a nuisance, right? Well, that takes a bit of organizing to start showing up at council meetings every Monday or whenever it is, right? Okay, so redefining what it means to be political. Nobody is allowed to be partisan in the work that we do. And that's really important because you've got to be able to work across political lines. But we're very political. All decision makers are fair game, right? So when we go and we talk to mayors and councillors, they say, oh, we're so glad you're here. We're so tired of taking 58 different, slightly different asks on affordable housing. We want to know what we can deliver for you. Most people who enter public service, at least in British Columbia, I don't know what it's like here, most people do it because they want to do good for their community. Now, they may have a very radically different idea about what that is than you and I might, but they are motivated by the common good. You're not going to make a fortune being a city councilor. It's just not a good way to make money. So they want to know what it is that's going to get them, you know, that way to go. Well done. We're so happy you did that. Yeah, people like that, right? Okay, next. So this is a really good quote. Capitalism tells us that the self is all important. Our educational system teaches self-sufficiency and independence, not community and interdependence. Political leaders want us as individual voters who can be reached one at a time by means of the mass media and the internet. The health industry treats us all as patients, that is, people who wait patiently in isolation to be treated by the medical system. Organized religion often wants us to have a private, personal experience of God, right? We're not doing that. We're flipping that around, but culture change takes a long time. So a way to think about it, and another one is that this is a journey. It's an ongoing journey. We're about coming to a consensus. You start, the roots are listening and building relationships internally and with other organizations. We're building power. We're coming to a consensus, and we're acting. Right? One of the things that was easy for me to hear, but hard for me to internalize, is that what we're doing is generational change. This is not about a successful march. It is not about even a successful meeting with a decision maker. It is about changing the way we engage in our society with each other. So this is about building the actual methodology, making sure that we get the issues right. So you bring people together. You ask them to do what you are doing in terms of identifying what the issues are, and listening campaigns. So Metro Vancouver Alliance just did a big listening campaign, 1,000 conversations they called it, and they kept score, right? So, you know, Angela might have a conversation in her house about what are the top 3 issues, and she would record that. It would be fed into a central database. So I actually think that they suck at managing data, and we can do way better. But, you know, we're all learning. So they're way better than most IF groups are in the state. But we need to be able to keep track of that. So here's how you discern. So I was present at a meeting where they did this, had 100 people in the room, all representing organizations. I care about you, and I care about what gets you up in the morning. But when you're at a meeting like that, you're speaking for your parish. And the question is, what is your parish prepared to organize around? Not what do you care about, but where's the energy coming from in your community, in your organization? And so people said, well, social isolation came up as the most important group. Nobody had predicted that. Nobody had predicted that. And so some of the work that they did around that is just so touching to me. And transit came up as the next one, housing. So they just, you fill out a piece of paper with it, they collect it, and then the ones that get the most votes rise to the top, because it's all about building people's power. The other ones don't call away. It's just that you're asked to work with the other people on, if socialization comes up as the big one, then you're expected to send somebody to that working group, right? Yeah. Next. Research action teams help to formulate the issue. So if transit is an issue in Ottawa, a research action team relying in BC heavily on the work of the CCPA, BC, will say, okay, well, if we make this transit, this will have the impact on this level of emission. So we need to be able to talk about that in a way that policymakers and the public can hear, right? So there's a lot of translation that goes on. If we ask for affordable housing to be built in Oak Bay, which is the municipality in which I live, that's a bigger ask because land is more expensive. So how can we make it possible for the city of View Royal, which has no industrial transportation, to sign on to making it easier for electric vehicles? You know, that's that kind of, you know, and research action teams meet every Tuesday night for 6 weeks while they figure out what it is that's going to be the winnable action that they then go and pin decision makers about. Or they go and talk to Murray Rankin, who some of you may know is really approachable, fantastic MP. And they say to Murray, like, you know, what do you think the feds could bring to the table if we ask the municipalities to do this? And how realistic is that? And so you're having these discussions where you're learning and you're researching what is those of you who might know the term action research or participatory action research, that's what this is. That's the name I would give it. That's not a name they give it in IF circles, but we're making it our own. Right? And we don't call them research action teams in Victoria. We're too nice to have anything like a rat working with us. We call them art action research. Okay, so here is the Citizens Assembly. I just want to point out this is at the Italian Cultural Center, which is a huge space. And this is to anti-poverty.
So unfortunately, it looks like the connection has been a little spotty, but we're coming pretty close to the end of Patricia's presentation. So if we don't have her back online in the near future, then I'll try to take any questions that I can if you have any. But otherwise, we look forward to having you join us in about an hour and a half on our webinar dealing with the benchmarking process that's about to be launched, the National Climate League. So maybe I'll just share a quick, phone just died. Okay, so that's our videographer's phone just passed away or dropped his battery off. So that's the story there. In the meantime, maybe I will just say a quick word while they're getting that plugged in, because I think Patricia does have a few more things to share with us here in the slide deck. And in the meantime, just say a quick word about the next webinar that's coming up in a couple of hours, because it's less of a webinar, more of a campaign launch. We will be, here we are, discussing the National Climate League launch starting at 5 p.m. Eastern. And this basically takes that message of Patricia's of diversifying coalitions and turns it into, okay, how do we measure what those people care about? So within the religious community, within the public health community, within the active transportation community, what are the issues they care most about? And can we start measuring them to demonstrate either progress or regression, and making sure that the numbers we're measuring are also good indicators or good proxies for emissions reductions? So that's what we're going to be discussing at 5 p.m. and you're more than welcome to stick around with us for that. So we'll wait another minute or two before before, pardon me. Here we go. So we have Takeo on Ken's phone now. And we might be able to get ourselves back in the meeting. Okay, not able to hear you just yet, Takeo. There we go, works. No, now you're muted.
You get everybody to agree to the rules beforehand. And one of the rules is you can never pick an issue that's going to force something. So, you know, for example, a lot of people worried when we started working, so we had lots of Catholics. Well, are we going to be like working to, you know, support a pro-life campaign? And the answer to that is no, because people have like a Venn diagram, right? So I might have issues A, B, C, E. You might have D, D, E, and they might have D, F, G, but we're all going to have C. We're not going to work on G, not a priority. My priority is A, B, C, right? So we have so much more that unites us and divides us, but our culture encourages us to focus on what divides us, and we're saying no, that's enough of that. We're going to do something different. We're going to focus on what unites. And there's great stories where, you know, a Catholic priest would be really active in a community in the U.S. and would, you know, be working really, really hard in one room with an organizer from pro-choice group over here on social housing. And then they go into the other public meeting and get logged. But over here, they both agree about social housing. So it's important to have an understanding that there are going to be things that we disagree about. I'm sure if I spent 2 minutes with each one of you, you and I could figure out something we disagree about.
Wouldn't take that long.
I'm interested in what unites. One of the things I would have liked to show you about the technology, our slide should have up it should. If you think about the power of government as being kind of this big, and you think about the power of the market as being this big, and you think about the power of civil society, I don't know about you, but I'd put it down. And I wouldn't put it in a circle. I'd put it fractured. And so what we're doing here is something that we desperately need to do. We need to rebalance our conversation in our democracy. And how else are we going to do it than having small meetings like this with people who want to work for the common good, so we can figure out how to begin. When I was going to high school, we had political science. I don't have them anymore. I got to be Deafin Lane. Right? So they don't have them anymore. One of the first things that neoliberals did was wipe out those classes in high school. There's lots of countries in the world where they do. Other questions and discussion? Yes, at the back.
Two kind of questions / concerns that are similar. When you get these groups together, two risks. You know, one is because the low and close one. But one is just kind of like analysis paralysis, studying the issue and like where's that, how do you drive the action like call? And then the second that's related is like about hearing change. I've worked with other organizations, sometimes put the eye to eye like process. And there are some groups that think that, you know, if you could only write the smartest, most extremely worded letter, you'd win the day rather than taking political action. I wonder how you bridge those gaps.
So the first question was, I have a good memory, but it's short. Analysis paralysis doesn't happen because this is feeling this accountability mechanism built in. So you've got a group of people who are elected, and you have organizations paying dues who want results. And and people are desperate for action, want action. And so people have a stake in it. It's not like, in my old women's groups, we used to sit around and, do you remember the minimum basis of unity days? Oh my God. So we don't have those. We're not interested in them. So we're trying to figure out what the winnable actions are, and we're trying to deliver fast. So the cycle, once you form, can be really quick. And there's an incentive to have it be really quick because you want to keep your members interested in paying dues. You can imagine how hard it would be for you to go back to Ecology Ottawa and say, okay, we're going to form this group and you should become the first dues paying members. Well, they're going to want to know what they get out of it. $1,000 out of their budget that they don't have anymore for their work. Oh, it is for their work, but it's going to be done with other people. Really? Really? Like, that's a conversation. So that's why it takes a long time. But then you've got to produce results or you're going to start losing. It actually can be quite rapid and quite flexible. Did I answer your second question? So in terms of, people wanting to do things at different paces, boy, do we ever have that problem in Victoria. I want to go really fast. Mm-hmm. And so, I kept saying, if we don't do something, we have core funding for 3 years. And we got it by going to an Anglican foundation, and we got it by going to the Catherine Donahue Foundation, who liked the idea that we would be combining Indigenous work with climate work, with taking it, people in Catherine Donnelly Foundation say, why don't people understand climate at home? Why isn't it an issue for them? So we said, well, we'll bring it home. So we got a really big grant from them, and we got a big grant from the local Anglican diocese, and we got money from the BC Government Employees Union and a credit union, and we just went shopping, right? And but now they're starting to say, we're 2 years in, so say, well, what's the result? And we're still forming, we're still persuading these, little not-for-profits to give us some of their really bootstrapped money. And so we have, it's a marketing problem, and it's also a delivery problem. So I said, well, we should start doing some stuff. And the core team said, well, you can't do it as cheap, but we can certainly help. And that's how we got the Saanich story. So we can't really take credit for the Saanich story as a GBET story. GBET's not formed. But we can sure take credit for it as, pushing some ideas about working cross-sectorally and about saying to people in the BC Sustainable Energy Association, you got to go talk to the people at Holy Cross. The high school students need to know what you're doing. And that in itself is value added. Did I answer your question?
Well, I'm curious about talking to the students at the Holy Cross and what they do, because I know that young people there's a tendency to want more action, not on the municipal level, and more direct action. And I guess I'm curious about how you bridge that. Right.
So there are groups of activists, and we have them in Victoria, who are not interested in collaborative action. They're interested in transactional statements, and they're not going to be very happy. So we work with people who are interested in collaborative action, and it is slower. And I'm kind of a big statement kind of person, but I don't think they work. And, one of the reasons I think that is because I'm a lawyer. And, if you're a young lawyer and you're going into law school and you're going to take environment or Indigenous law, which are the two kind of really interesting places to be at the moment, you're really hopeful, but then you go study it and you realize how slow it is. And the reality is that you don't make progress as a lawyer unless you have a social studies. And then it can be really interesting. Well, it's the same thing. I don't think you make progress with transactional statements. The crosses on the lawn where people died in British Columbia, you have a mass opioid crisis. 4 people a day are dying. And so they did a law statement with process. Well, that's very important that people see it, but it doesn't change. So inside GVAT, we're doing some cross-sectoral organizing around the opioid crisis. Not something GVAT will advance as a priority, but we're bringing people from sectors across to think about that. Did that answer your question? So my experience, though, is that there's many more high school students who are interested in doing something useful without kind of stepping too far outside their comfort zone. So if they have a group of people who they respect, who say this is going to be really useful, and then they have another group of adults like counselors say, thank you very much, that was really useful. That's really rewarding. And then you go back to them and you say, this is what you did. Then you've now taught a generation of young leaders that they can have input. And there's so much effort goes into persuading young people now that they know that. So that can be a really gratifying.
I don't think we've mentioned this, Patricia, but knowing the documentation, it's first of all, you did mention to me that it's a non-profit status.
Yeah, we have charitable
status. And the other thing was partly because you're doing a lot of leadership training.
Yeah, so we're building leaders. You can look at IAF work or GVAT or NBA work a number of months. One of them is about political organizing. But another is building leaders. So we're trying to leave behind us leaderful communities. So people might interact with GVAT only for a short period of time, like that young environmental lawyer who came in and did organizing for us as a kind of, he wanted to make a contribution, and a friend of a friend connected him with me. And I said, boy, do I have a job for you. And he began organizing this group that was going to go to Spanish Council. And he was really well positioned because he wasn't affiliated with Holy Cross Correctional. So there weren't these institutional loyalties. And so he pulled the meetings together. He went to talk to some of the counselors on behalf of other people. He was a lawyer, so he's well spoken, environmental. Well, he had to go up to Fort St. John to go work for somebody in stuff for a big block of time. So he's not there now. But his life's been changed. He understands how to So at least through that lens. So building a leaderful community it's a very, very important driver. And that's why churches like Vancouvers. That's why the Catholic Foundation. That's why we have money this year from the Victoria Foundation. Community foundations have been slow to come to work, but they see it now. They understand. That's what we did in terms of people. Sometimes want to know the logistics. So bring the core team together. Everybody's a volunteer. The first round of training, if you get the IF to do it, it's free. And then you operate as volunteers. And you try to find money we wanted to pay an organizer. I figured that this wasn't sustainable for me. I've got elderly parents, and when one of them, my mom broke 2 ribs last week, she needs me. Like, I can't not go to a meeting. I have to be an emergency with her, right? So, and so I could see that coming in my own life, and I thought, no, we have to have be organized. Well, we got to raise more. So we went to these various courses, but that's not money to form. The money to form is from the state. So that's why it takes a long time to persuade people doing really good work that they should give up some of the money that they use to do their own good work to do good work with other people. And we can't guarantee that their priority will be one of the top. That and takes time. A lot. Yeah.
5 minutes.
Okay, so I would like you to turn to somebody that you haven't spoken to before, please. And come away with one thing that you learned, and one thing that surprised you about this meeting. All right? So you could have learned Patricia Lane is the world's worst speaker. I'm going to avoid her. You could have learned that this model is interesting, and so, and maybe one next step part of the work, right? And I'm going to
And
get
just in terms of context,
Angela to
Patricia has said she is glad to stay for another hour, probably continue to talk with anyone who wants to stay, but we'll have a quick break at the forest when anyone wants to.
And there's
So
snacks
appreciate it.
back there.
And we have Angela has snacks in the kitchen as well.
And if I can get my notebook back, I'd really appreciate it.
So if you haven't signed, please do so, because it's really important to keep a record of people who care enough to show up.
So before we ask administrative questions, would everybody be happy to share each other's coordinates? Or does someone want to speak private?
Just let Angela know if you want to stay private, okay?
Okay, then we can all.
So don't hijack my evaluation. It's really important. Okay, so just spend 2 minutes with somebody else identifying something you learned, something that surprised you, and the next step. Okay? And then I'm going to ask Angela to figure out a way to take that feedback because we won't have time for it. Okay?
Thank you very much, everyone. I think we're going to leave the webcast now, leave the live stream. So thank you so much for those. Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Takeo, for videoing that for us, despite some of the challenges there in the middle. And if you would like to participate in that feedback session that Patricia suggested, that being share something that you learned, something that you were surprised about, and something that you're going to do next. What's your next step? Then you can feel free to send that to us, and we'd be happy to know what you took away from this webinar, from this live stream today. contact@climatehub.ca is the address that you can send that to. So for those who are joining us in 1 hour for the National Climate League launch, looking forward to having you with us. And for those who are signing off for the afternoon, have yourselves a wonderful Sunday evening, and looking forward to seeing you next time. Take care.